Welcome back to Crimson Archivium, where the past is not just remembered but brought back to life with depth and clarity. When people imagine punishment in the ancient world, they often think of swift executions, beheadings, poison, or ritual killings meant to satisfy divine law. Ancient Egypt, however, developed something far more psychologically devastating. For the Egyptians, death was not the ultimate punishment. In fact, killing a criminal outright was sometimes considered too merciful. Instead, Egypt perfected punishments designed to destroy a person's identity, dignity, and future, while keeping them alive. To understand why this approach was so effective, one must first understand how Egyptians viewed life, order, and the afterlife. Egyptian civilization was built on the concept of Ma'at, the cosmic balance that governed truth, justice, and harmony. Every person, from pharaoh to farmer, had a role to play in maintaining this balance. Crime was not merely an offense against the state, it was a violation of the universe itself. Punishment, therefore, was not just retribution, it was cosmic correction. Unlike modern legal systems that prioritize incarceration or rehabilitation, Egyptian justice aimed to make the criminal an example. The state sought to ensure that the punishment echoed long after the crime was forgotten. This is where Egypt's unique cruelty emerged. Punishments that erased social existence, spiritual security, and human worth without ending physical life. One of the most feared concepts in Egyptian justice was social death. To the Egyptians, being alive but cut off from society, memory, and honor was worse than dying. A person's name, family lineage, and burial rites were essential for survival in the afterlife. Without these, the soul would wander eternally, denied judgment and rebirth. Punishments were designed to exploit this belief. Criminals, especially those guilty of treason, tomb robbery, or sacrilege, were often publicly stripped of titles, property, and legal identity. Their names could be erased from records, monuments, and even family tombs. This act, known today as damnatio memoriae, though the term is Roman, effectively annihilated a person's existence. The criminal still breathed, still worked, still suffered, but officially they no longer were. Forced labor was another cornerstone of Egyptian punishment, but it was not merely physical hardship. Convicted individuals were sent to quarries, mines, or state construction projects, often in remote deserts. These locations were deliberately chosen. The desert represented chaos, the opposite of Ma'at. To be banished, there was symbolically to be cast out of civilization itself. Life in these labor camps was brutal. Workers endured extreme heat, starvation-level rations, physical abuse, and constant surveillance. Escape was nearly impossible. Death was common, but ironically, death was not the goal. Survival meant continued suffering, humiliation, and exhaustion. Every day alive was another day the punishment succeeded. Public humiliation also played a critical role in Egyptian justice. Criminals could be paraded through streets, beaten publicly, or marked physically, sometimes by shaving the head, branding, or mutilation, such as cutting off the nose or ears. These acts served two purposes. First, they instilled fear in the population. Second, they ensured the criminal could never reintegrate into society unnoticed. Their body itself became a living record of their crime. What made this especially cruel was the permanence. There was no sentence completion, no restoration of honor. Once marked, a person was permanently othered. Employers avoided them, communities rejected them, temples denied them access. The punishment followed them until death and beyond. Religion amplified this cruelty. Priests and officials often declared certain criminals ritually impure, barring them from temples and religious festivals. This exclusion was devastating in a society where religion governed daily life. Being unable to participate in rituals meant being cut off from the gods themselves. For Egyptians, this was a terrifying fate. Divine abandonment threatened not only one's present life but eternal existence. Perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of Egyptian punishment was its impact on the afterlife. Egyptians believed that after death, the heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, but this judgment required proper burial, rites, offerings, and remembrance by the living. Criminals who suffered social death often received none of these. Families of the condemned could be punished as well, losing property, status, or burial privileges. This collective punishment ensured silence and obedience throughout society. Fear extended beyond the individual, embedding itself into entire households and lineages. The brilliance, if it can be called that, of the Egyptian system lay in its restraint. By not killing the offender, the state prolonged the lesson. Each ruined life became a warning etched into public consciousness. The criminal became a walking symbol of what happens when Ma'at is violated. In this way, ancient Egypt redefined punishment. Justice was not about ending a life, but about ending a life's meaning. The body survived, but the person was erased, socially, spiritually, and historically. To the Egyptians, this was not cruelty, it was order restored. And for those condemned to live without name, honor, or hope of eternity, it was a fate far worse than death in ancient Egypt. Not all crimes were equal. Some offenses were considered so dangerous to the cosmic order that execution was seen as insufficient, or even inappropriate. To the Egyptian mind, certain acts threatened Ma'at itself, the fragile balance that held the universe together. For these crimes, death was too quick, too final, and sometimes too merciful. Instead, the state reserved punishments designed to break the offender's soul, see their legacy, and deny them eternity. At the top of this hierarchy of unforgivable crimes stood treason against the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not merely a king, he was a living god, the earthly embodiment of divine order. To betray him was to attack the gods themselves. But rather than always executing traitors, Egyptian authorities often chose a fate worse, total erasure. Names were chiseled out of inscriptions, statues were smashed, records rewritten. The traitor was denied burial honors, and their family could be stripped of rank or punished alongside them. The message was clear. This person had never existed in the eyes of history or the gods. Closely following treason was tomb robbery, a crime modern audiences often underestimate. To an Egyptian, a tomb was not a memorial, it was a functional home for eternity. Stealing from it was not theft, it was spiritual murder. Tomb robbers disrupted the afterlife of the dead, risking divine chaos and cosmic imbalance. Because of this, many tomb robbers were not executed immediately. Instead, they were subjected to public trials, humiliation, beatings, and forced labor, often ending their days in quarries or mines. The irony is striking. A tomb robber might live for years after sentencing, but without honor, community, or hope of salvation. Their own afterlife was effectively destroyed as punishment for threatening another's. In Egyptian thinking, this symmetry was justice. Religious crimes were considered equally severe. Raiding a temple, harming sacred animals, or mocking rituals endangered the relationship between Egypt and the gods. Animals like cats, ibises, crocodiles, and bulls were not symbolic. They were divine vessels. Killing or mistreating one could provoke public lynching or state punishment. Yet in some cases offenders were spared death only to be declared ritually impure, banned from temples and festivals for life. This exclusion was devastating. Religion permeated every aspect of Egyptian existence: birth, work, illness, marriage, death. To be barred from religious spaces was to live in a spiritual vacuum. Such individuals were believed to be abandoned by the gods, a fate that terrified Egyptians far more than physical suffering. Another crime regarded as worse than death was corruption among officials, especially judges, scribes, and priests. These men were guardians of Ma'at. When they accepted bribes, altered records, or abused power, they undermined justice itself. Punishments could include public flogging, confiscation of property, demotion to hard labor, or mutilation, particularly cutting off the nose or ears. These marks were not only painful but symbolic. The official was permanently identified as unworthy. Loss of status was often more punishing than bodily harm. Egyptian society was rigidly hierarchical, and identity was tied to profession and rank. To fall from scribe or priest to quarry slave was a social annihilation. Former elites, forced into manual labor, were leaving warnings to others who might be tempted by greed. False testimony and perjury were also viewed with extreme seriousness. Courts relied heavily on sworn oaths to the gods. Lying under oath was a spiritual crime, not just a legal one. Those found guilty could be beaten, publicly shamed, or forced into labor. More importantly, they lost trust forever. In a culture built on reputation and communal memory, this loss was irreversible. Some crimes threatened not the state, but the family structure, which Egyptians believed was the foundation of social order. Abandoning dependence, abusing familial authority, or disrupting inheritance could bring harsh consequences. While records are fragmentary, texts suggest that offenders might be disinherited, exiled, or condemned to labor far from their kin, cut off from ancestral burial sites and family tombs. This separation ensured spiritual doom as well as social disgrace. What unified all these worse-than-death crimes was the punishment's focus on continuity. Egyptians feared endings that broke the chain between past, present, and future. A person's name spoken by descendants, offerings placed by relatives, and memory preserved in stone ensured immortality. Crimes that threatened this continuity demanded punishments that shattered it completely. Perhaps the most chilling aspect is that many of these punishments extended beyond the individual. Collective responsibility meant families could suffer consequences, loss of property, or burial rights, because of one person's crime. This created a society governed by fear, obedience, and silence. People policed themselves and one another, knowing that a single misstep could doom generations. In the eyes of the pharaohs, mercy lay not in sparing life, but in preserving order. A criminal left alive but erased, broken, and forgotten was proof that Maat had been restored. Their suffering was not excess, it was necessary. Thus, ancient Egypt defined certain crimes as worse than death because their consequences threatened eternity itself. And for those who committed them, living on without honor, memory, or divine favor was the ultimate punishment. A slow, inescapable destruction that no execution could rival. The legal system of ancient Egypt was not designed to protect individual rights or ensure fairness in the modern sense. Its primary purpose was far more ambitious and far more intimidating. Egyptian law existed to preserve power, enforce obedience, and maintain fear, all in service of Ma'at, the cosmic order that justified the authority of the pharaoh and the state. Justice was less about what was right for the individual and more about what was necessary for stability. At the very top of this system stood the pharaoh, the ultimate judge. As a living god, his word carried divine authority. Even when he did not personally preside over cases, all judgments were believed to flow from him. This meant that disobedience to the law was not merely civil defiance. It was sacrilege. To challenge a verdict was to challenge the gods themselves. Below the pharaoh were judges, viziers, priests, and scribes, each acting as an extension of divine will. These officials were not expected to show compassion. Instead, they were expected to demonstrate control. A punishment that inspired fear was seen as effective justice. A punishment that allowed sympathy to flourish was considered dangerous. Fear was deliberately cultivated. Trials were public whenever possible. Confessions were extracted openly. Sentences were announced in ways meant to echo through communities. Justice in ancient Egypt was performative, not to entertain but to warn. Every case carried a message. Obedience ensured survival, disobedience ensured ruin. One of the most powerful tools in this system was uncertainty. Egyptian law was not codified in a single, transparent legal code accessible to all. Instead, it existed in decrees, precedents, and interpretations controlled by elites. This lack of clarity ensured that ordinary people never fully understood the boundaries of punishment. Fear thrived in ambiguity. When the limits are unclear, people behave cautiously. Interrogation methods reinforced this control. While records rarely describe procedures in detail, surviving documents and later accounts strongly suggest that physical coercion was commonly used to extract confessions, especially in serious crimes like tomb robbery or conspiracy. Confession was considered proof of guilt, and once obtained, the punishment was swift and severe. The system valued order over truth, deterrence over mercy. But physical pain was only part of the strategy. The Egyptian legal system excelled at psychological domination. Accused individuals were often isolated from family and community during proceedings. This isolation weakened resistance and reinforced dependence on authority. Once condemned, the individual was rarely allowed to defend their reputation. Silence followed punishment, ensuring the state controlled the narrative. The law also functioned as a hierarchical weapon. While everyone was theoretically subject to punishment varied dramatically by class. Elites who fell from grace suffered public disgrace precisely because they had more to lose. A former official reduced to forced labor sent a stronger message than the execution of a peasant. The system understood symbolism and it exploited it expertly. Forced labor, in particular, reveals how law and power intertwined. Convicted individuals were sent to quarries, mines, or state projects, not only to be punished, but to serve the state physically. Their bodies became tools of authority. Every stone cut, every monument raised by condemned hands, reinforced the dominance of the regime. The punished literally built the legacy of those who destroyed them. Fear was further reinforced by collective punishment. Families could lose property, titles, or burial privileges because of one member's crime. This policy turned households into surveillance units. People monitored each other not out of loyalty to the state, but out of terror of shared consequences. Control spread organically without constant enforcement. Religion amplified this fear. Courts regularly invoked the gods, requiring oaths sworn before divine witnesses. Breaking an oath was believed to bring supernatural punishment, illness, misfortune, or eternal suffering. The state did not need to enforce every penalty. Belief ensured compliance. A person might escape a beating, but never divine judgment. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Egyptian legal system was its ability to punish without closure. Many sentences had no clear end. Forced labor could last a lifetime. Social disgrace could never be undone. Religious exclusion had no appeal process. The condemned lived in a permanent state of punishment, unsure if redemption was even possible. This uncertainty was intentional. Hope weakens fear. Egypt allowed very little of it. The system also controlled memory. Legal outcomes were recorded or erased by scribes loyal to the state. If an individual was deemed dangerous enough, their existence could be quietly removed from official history. This ability to control narrative ensured that power extended beyond life itself. Law did not just govern the living, it governed how the dead were remembered. To modern eyes, this system appears cruel and oppressive, but within its own framework, it was seen as necessary. Egypt survived for millennia not because it was kind, but because it was stable. Stability required obedience, obedience required fear, and fear required punishment that reached deeper than the flesh. The Egyptian legal system did not seek to correct behavior, it sought to dominate it. By controlling bodies, beliefs, families, and memory, it created a society where rebellion was unthinkable and conformity was survival. In this world, punishment was not an endpoint. It was a process, one that slowly dismantled identity, agency, and hope. The law did not kill its enemies, it kept them alive as proof of its power to a modern observer. Sparing a person's life might appear merciful. In ancient Egypt, however, survival could be the most devastating punishment of all. The Egyptian worldview placed immense value not merely on being alive, but on living with dignity, purpose, social belonging, and spiritual security. When punishment stripped these away while leaving the body intact, the result was a slow, deliberate destruction that many Egyptians feared more than death itself. At the heart of this cruelty was Egypt's belief in continuity. Life was not a single chapter, but part of an unbroken chain stretching from birth through death and into eternity. A good death required a good life. Proper social standing, a respected name, family connections, religious participation, and burial rites. Survival without these elements was not living, it was a prolonged failure of existence. This is why Egyptian punishments often targeted conditions of life, not life itself. One of the most common ways survival was weaponized was through lifelong forced labor. Convicts sent to mines, quarries, or distant state projects were not expected to reform or return. These places were intentionally brutal and isolated, often located in deserts that symbolized chaos and disorder. To be sent there was to be expelled from civilization itself. Survivors of such sentences lived in constant exhaustion, malnutrition, and physical pain. Yet the punishment was not complete if they died quickly. A living laborer continued to suffer, continued to serve the state, and continued to embody warning. Each day, alive, reinforced the message that defying Maat led not to release, but to endless degradation. Equally cruel was social survival without identity. Egyptians believed a person's name was essential to their existence. To speak someone's name was to keep them alive in memory. Punishments that erased names from records, monuments, and tombs condemned individuals to a unique form of living death. They still walked the earth, but officially they did not exist. This erasure followed them everywhere. Without a recognized name, a person had no honor, no legal standing, and no future. Employers avoided them. Communities rejected them. Even family members distanced themselves out of fear. The condemned became shadows, present but invisible, alive but already forgotten. Physical survival with permanent bodily marks added another layer of cruelty. Mutilations such as cutting off the nose or ears were not random acts of violence, they were symbolic. The face was central to identity, recognition, and dignity. Altering it ensured lifelong humiliation. Every interaction became a reminder of disgrace. There was no hiding, no reinvention, no escape from the past. Unlike execution, which ended suffering, mutilation guaranteed it would continue daily, in stares, whispers, rejection, and self-loathing. The body itself became a prison. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of survival-based punishment was religious exclusion. To be barred from temples, rituals, and festivals was to be cut off from the gods. Egyptians did not separate religion from daily life. The two were inseparable. Festivals marked seasons, offerings ensured health, and prayers structured time. Exclusion meant spiritual isolation in a society where spiritual connection defined existence. A person could survive physically, yet believe themselves abandoned by divine forces. This belief alone was psychologically crushing. Without the favor of the gods, misfortune was expected, illness feared, and the afterlife considered lost. Such individuals lived with constant anxiety, interpreting every hardship as divine puni. Shment layered upon human judgment. Survival also became cruel through familial separation. Many punishments deliberately removed individuals from their homes and ancestral lands. This was not incidental, it was strategic. Egyptians believed family was essential for identity, care in old age, and posthumous remembrance. To survive without family support meant vulnerability, loneliness, and eventual spiritual erasure. Even worse, some punishments extended suffering beyond the individual. Families of the condemned could lose property, status, or burial rights. Survivors lived knowing their continued existence brought shame or hardship to loved ones. This guilt was part of the punishment. Living became a burden, not a gift. The Egyptian obsession with the afterlife transformed survival into a ticking clock of despair. A person condemned to live without access to proper burial preparation knew that every passing year worsened their fate. Without wealth, offerings, or social standing, they could not secure tombs or funerary goods. Survival ensured they would one day die unprepared, an ultimate failure in Egyptian belief. In this way, survival robbed individuals of hope. Death, when properly prepared for, promised continuity and rebirth. Life without preparation promised oblivion. What made this system especially cruel was its finality. There was rarely redemption. Punishments did not come with clear terms or end dates. A sentence might last as long as the gods decree, which often meant until death. Hope of restoration was minimal. The condemned learned to expect nothing but endurance. This is why survival was sometimes considered worse than execution. Death ended suffering and, with proper rites, allowed passage into the next world. Survival under punishment prolonged humiliation. isolation, fear, and spiritual dread. It was a sentence with no closure. Ancient Egypt understood something profoundly unsettling, that humans can endure extraordinary pain if it leads somewhere. But pain without purpose, life without meaning, and survival without dignity break the spirit. By sparing the body and destroying everything else, Egyptian punishment achieved its ultimate goal. The condemned lived on, not as people, but as warnings. In ancient Egypt, punishment reached far beyond pain, confinement, or labor. Its most devastating function was the systematic erasure of identity and honor, a fate the Egyptians believed could destroy a person more completely than death. To lose one's name, reputation, social role, and spiritual legitimacy was to be unmade as a human being. The body might continue to breathe, but the person, in every meaningful sense, ceased to exist. Identity in Egypt was not individualistic in the modern sense. A person was defined by name, lineage, profession, social standing, and religious worth. These elements formed a single, inseparable whole. Remove one, and the rest began to collapse. Egyptian punishment was designed with this understanding, targeting identity with surgical precision. The most feared punishment of all was the destruction of the name. Egyptians believed that the name, Ren, was a core component of the soul. To speak a person's name kept them alive in memory. To erase it condemned them to oblivion. This belief gave the state immense power. When officials ordered a name removed from inscriptions, tombs, or records, they were not merely censoring history. They were killing a person's past and future simultaneously. Names could be chiseled out of monuments, painted over in tombs, or omitted from official lists. In extreme cases, statues were smashed or defaced so the individual could not be recognized in the afterlife. This punishment was reserved for those deemed existential threats, traitors, conspirators, or officials who abused sacred trust. The message was merciless: you are unworthy of remembrance. What made this erasure especially cruel was its permanence. Death might end suffering, but erasure denied even the dignity of being mourned. Family members were often forbidden from speaking the condemned's name or maintaining their tomb. In a culture obsessed with remembrance, silence was annihilation. Honor was equally vital. Egyptian society functioned on reputation and visible status. Titles, clothing, housing, and proximity to power all communicated a person's worth. Punishment frequently targeted these symbols. Officials stripped of rank were not merely demoted, they were publicly humiliated. To fall from priest or scribe to quarry laborer was to experience social death in real time. This loss of honor was intentional and instructional. Former elites forced into manual labor served as living warnings. Their visibility reinforced obedience. If someone so powerful could be reduced to nothing, anyone could. The state weaponized shame as effectively as pain. Physical alteration of the body further erased identity. Mutilations, such as removing the nose or ears, were not arbitrary acts of cruelty. The face was essential to recognition and dignity. To permanently alter it ensured that the punished individual would never escape their crime. Every glance from a stranger, every whispered judgment reinforced their exclusion. The body itself became a billboard of disgrace. These marks also had legal and social consequences. A visibly mutilated person was instantly suspect. Employment, marriage, and community participation became nearly impossible. Survival continued, but identity was fractured beyond repair. Religious exclusion deepened this erasure. To be barred from temples and rituals was to lose spiritual legitimacy. Egyptians believed the gods actively participated in daily life, granting protection, fertility, and health. Being denied access to worship meant living as an outsider not only among people, but among divine forces. The punished individual became spiritually homeless. This exclusion followed them into death. Without ritual participation, offering or priestly intercession, the afterlife was believed to be inaccessible. Identity was not just erased in life, it was denied eternity. Punishment also severed familial identity. Families were the custodians of memory and burial rites. When the state punished families alongside individuals, by confiscating property, stripping titles, or revoking burial privileges, it ensured that identity destruction was total. A person without family remembrance had no future even after death. This collective dimension of punishment reinforced obedience at every level of society. Families became enforcers of conformity, fearing that one member's disobedience could doom them all. Identity was no longer personal, it was conditional. Even language played a role in erasure. Official records could redefine the condemned using dehumanizing terms: criminal, enemy of Ma'at, or one who does not exist. Such labels replaced names and reduced individuals to warnings. The state controlled not only what happened, but how it was remembered. What distinguishes Egyptian punishment from many other ancient systems is its obsession with continuity. The goal was not simply to end a life or exact revenge, but to break the chain connecting past, present, and future. A person erased from memory could not influence descendants, claim legacy, or participate in eternity. This was the ultimate neutralization of threat. From the state's perspective, this approach was efficient and righteous. A living, erased individual required no martyrdom, inspired no rebellion, and left no story worth repeating. Their absence became a stabilizing force. To the punished, however, this fate was unbearable. Survival without identity meant waking each day as a stranger to the world and to oneself. There was no redemption, no restoration, no appeal to history or the gods. The sentence did not end with death, it continued beyond it. Ancient Egypt understood a dark truth, that humans can endure pain, hunger, and even fear, but the loss of meaning is devastating. By erasing identity and honor, punishment achieved its most complete form. It did not merely discipline the body, it erased the person. In doing so, the Egyptian state demonstrated a power few civilizations ever mastered, the power not just to kill but to unmake.